Four players, Abe, Betty, Cora, and Dana, are dividing among themselves a set of common assets equally owned by the four of them. The assets are divided into four shares, S sub 1, S sub 2, S sub 3, and S sub 4. The table to the right shows the values of the shares to each player expressed as a percent of the total value of the assets. Use this information to answer part A through E. Now the first thing that we want to discuss here is the smallest possible value of a fair share. And let me write that down. And that's going to be the fact that we have four assets. And the four assets will represent a 100% share. And since all four of them need to have a smallest possible value, we'll go ahead and take 100% divided by 4, and that gives me a 25% fair share for each asset. Now that doesn't mean that each player is going to consider 25% to be a fair share for each asset. And in fact, if we look at the table right here, we'll see that Abe looks at S sub 1 is 22%, S sub 2 is 28%, S sub 3 is 24%, and S sub 4 is 26%. Now, since 25% represents the smallest possible value of a fair share, when we look at part A, which says which of the shares are fair shares to Abe, they must be greater than or equal to 25%. So for Abe, we're looking at S sub 2, comma, S sub 4. And that's what you're going to enter into the program. Now here's where it gets a little tricky and you may run into some problems entering it in. And let me bring in that so that we can look at it. Now you'll see that we have the problem here, and right here for part A is the answer field. And we're going to do S sub 2 and S sub 4. These are going to be lowercase, so you'll type in the letter S. You're going to need to use the math palette. You'll see that it says subscript, which is also the control plus if you want to use keystrokes. If I left click that, you'll notice that I now have a new blue field here. And if I type in 2, we'll see that I have now inputted S sub 2. This may be a little difficult to see, so you may want to maximize your screen. The problem is if I go ahead and type in the comma to separate it, as it says right here, use a comma to separate answers as needed, the comma is in the subscript field. And that is going to cause my MATLAB to mark this as an incorrect answer. Instead, let me backspace, you're going to want to use your right arrow key and kick the cursor out to the right, and notice that it's gotten much bigger. Then you type the comma. And then you'll go ahead and type S. Once again, we're going to need to go ahead and do a subscript, and we'll type in 4. And now we will check the answer. And you'll see that we get a well done. Now, we're going to find the fair shares for Betty in a moment, but one thing that I want to show to you is if you go ahead and put the comma down below, it will mark it incorrect, and we'll do that in a moment. So let's go ahead and go back to this part and say, we want to know which of the shares are fair shares to Betty. So once again, we're going to be looking at the fair shares in comparison to the smallest value. Remember, the smallest value is 25%. And we'll see that Betty actually divides everything at 25%. So she considers all four of them to be fair shares. And your answer would be S sub 1, comma, S sub 2, comma, S sub 3, comma, S sub 4. Now, we'll go back into my MATLAB and I'll show you how this works. Once again, you're going to left click in the answer field. You're going to type S. And now I want to go ahead and put in a subscript of 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens if I don't kick the comma out above or use the right arrow key. Notice that the comma is way down there. And then I'm going to do the right arrow key and I'm going to type in S sub 2. And look at the difference here, and it may be difficult for you to see it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow it up. Now notice, and this is what's important here, is the fact that when I look at this comma right here, it's in a different position than this comma right here. This is the correct position, and you'll notice that the comma itself is up higher on the subscript. This one is an incorrect position, and you'll notice that it is much lower on the subscript. And that is why my MATLAB would mark this as incorrect, because the comma itself is in the wrong place. Now we're going to go back to the answer field. I'm going to use my right arrow key, and I'm going to kick myself, and you'll see, or I should say kick the cursor out, and you'll see that the cursor is much larger than it was before. We'll type in S sub 3. And I'm going to put the comma right there again. Notice that the cursor is very small. Use the right arrow key. Notice that it's much bigger. So we have a problem, and we want to get rid of that particular comma, and we want to kick it out to here. And then we're going to type in S sub 4, S, use the subscript, type in 4. Now notice that I have not corrected this comma right here, over here on the left after S sub 1, and I'm going to check my answer. And it tells me that it's wrong. Now this is trying to tell me exactly what I did wrong. However, in this case, my MATLAB doesn't do a very good job. So I left click done. I'm going to go back in. Notice that this comma is not in the same position as the other two commas. I'm going to left click in that field. I use my backspace key, get rid of it. I'm going to use the right arrow key and kick it up so that it's a bigger cursor. Use the comma. And now I'm going to check my answer. And you'll see that that's the only difference. And I now have the correct answer. So let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so now which of the shares are fair shares to Corey? Well, we're going to look for those that are greater than or equal to 25%. For Corey, we have share sub 2, or asset sub S sub 2, and then S sub 4. So we'll write this as S sub 2, comma S sub 4. So let's go ahead and enter that into my MATLAB, and we'll type in S subscript 2, use the right arrow key, type in the comma, type in S subscript 4, and we'll go ahead and check my answer. And then the last one is going to be which of the shares are fair shares to Donna. And of course I said Donna, and it should have been Dana. So we're looking at fair shares for Dana. So let's go ahead and find fair shares for Dana. We'll notice that Dana considers S sub 1 to be worth 25%, S sub 3 is 25%, and S sub 4 is 27%. So we would write this down as S sub 1, S sub 3, and S sub 4. And we'll enter that into my MATLAB, doing the same thing that we've been doing. So we have S sub 1, right arrow key, comma. Then we'll type in S sub 3, right arrow, comma, and S sub 4. And then we will check the answer. Alright, so now that we've done this, we've got all the shares that are set up as fair shares for each one of the players. We need to find all fair divisions of the assets using S sub 1, S sub 2, S sub 3, and S sub 4 as shares. Now in my MATLAB, you will go ahead and you will use the check boxes here, and you're going to use the one that, or you're going to check all the ones that apply. So we're going to go ahead and start with Abe. And if we start with Abe, we note that this is the first one that we could use, which would be S sub 2. So Abe would get S sub 2. And if that's the case, then we need to look at what we can assign for Betty. And assigning for Betty, well, that means that she could get S sub 1, S sub 3, or S sub 4, because in this particular case, S sub 2 is gone. So if we assign, let's say, S sub 1 for Betty, we'll see that, and let me go ahead and use X's. This one has been deleted. This one has now been deleted. And we'll go to the next set for Corey, which means that my only choice, since this row has been deleted, I can't use it for Corey, and I can't use this one because obviously 20% is not a minimum fair share, so we'll use this one. So that means Corey will get S sub 4. And finally, we will go ahead and look at Dana, and the only thing that's left would be S sub 3. So Dana will get S sub 3. So if Abe gets S sub 1, Betty's going to get Abe will get S sub 2, Betty will get S sub 1, Corey gets S sub 4, and Dana gets S sub 3. That's going to be this one right here. Well, that's one possibility, and there are going to be others. So let's go ahead and get rid of the X's. And then we're going to talk about Abe again. Okay. Now, in this case, there may be other alternatives where Abe has S sub 2, and we could see what happens. So let's go ahead and say Abe has S sub 2. That means we're going to look at Betty. And since we've already used S sub 1 previously, what are my other choices here? Well, I could do S sub 3 or S sub 4, so let's go with S sub 3. And let's see if we can continue on. We'll look at Corey. And Corey is either going to be 30 or 27, and since 30's already been, S sub 2's already been taken by Abe, we'll go ahead and look at S sub 4 for Corey. And then that leaves, finally, for Dana, only S sub 1. So Dana will be S sub 1. Let's double check and make sure we have that possibility, and we do. This will be F. So we'll go ahead and write that in. And then we're going to go ahead and start over. So now ideally I should go ahead and check this one more time and see if there's any other possible arrangements. But one of the things that I'll have you note here is Abe only gets S sub 2 twice. So that means I need to be looking at the other possibilities. But we note that S sub 1 is not a minimum fair share, so we can automatically disregard this one, and we can disregard this one. We also note that S sub 3 is not a minimum share for Abe, so we'll disregard that, leaving us with A and D as possibilities. Now we need to go ahead and make sure that both of them work. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at S sub 4. So if Abe gets S sub 4, what does that leave for Betty? Well, for Betty, that leaves either S sub 1 or S sub 3. But we need to make sure that if Betty has S sub 3, that Corey can still have a fair share, which in this case will be S sub 2, and Dana will also have a fair share, which in this case will be S sub 1. So we'll go ahead and write this as Abe being S sub 4, Betty will be S sub 3, Corey will be S sub 2, and Dana will be S sub 1. And does that match any of the ones over here? Well, yes, it does, right here, part D. Which leaves me with part A, and we just want to confirm that that is in fact a true statement. So let's go ahead and get rid of the x's, and let's start over. And we'll start once again with S sub 4 for Abe. So we'll get rid of this one. And then we'll do Betty with S sub 1. And that means that Corey has to have S sub 2. And that means that Dana has to have S sub 3. So that means that we would write it as S sub 4, S sub 1, S sub 2 again for Corey, and then S sub 3 for Dana. And does that work? Right here. So that means our answer would be A, D, F, and G. So A, D, F, and G. And we are finished with the problem.